Good evening, a very, very good evening to everybody here. I'm Maggie Ferguson, I'm the Deputy Editor of The Tablet, and on behalf of all of us at The Tablet, I want to say a really big thank you to you for coming here this evening to hear what I am confident is going to be not just a life-enhancing, but a life-changing talk from John Casson. It's also going to be published in The Tablet soon, so if you're not already a subscriber, this is your moment. All of the staff of The Tablet have been hugely looking forward to meeting and chatting with what we regard as the Tablet family of supporters and friends, and most of all, this evening, our very precious friends from L'Arche. It's a while since we've held a Tablet lecture, and that we're able to do so now, and in such amazing surroundings, is down to the huge generosity of CCLA. We are so grateful to them. We're also enormously grateful to Michal Husein, who will be chairing this evening's talk. All of you will know Michal from radio or television or both, but here she is for real, in the flesh, and it's really thrilling to have her here. Thank you, Michal.
I won't hold you from Michal for very long, but as is our way of sort of being, we just wanted to extend a very warm welcome to all of you from CCLA, and welcome to young and not so young. I think we've got 9 months at the back there and a good range, so you are all very, very welcome. For those of you who are less familiar with CCLA, I just want to tell you 3 very quick things about us. The first thing is that we are the largest investment manager for churches, charities and local authorities here in the UK. And big does not always mean better, but in our case it does mean that we have scale and we have experience and we have an incredible vantage point from which we can see both the challenges faced by the charity sector but also the incredible work done across the sector in the UK. The second thing is that we are structured a bit like a mutual. So we are effectively owned by our clients, which is wonderful for me because I'm only incentivized to deliver the best possible returns I can to the shareholders who happen to be you, the charities and the churches who invest with us. So it makes it a nice place to work. The third thing, and I'll close with this, is that being an investment manager for churches, charities and local authorities, as you might expect, sort of ethical and responsible investment has been very much part of our DNA right back to our roots in 1958. So please come and ask any questions you may have about CCLA. You're all really welcome. We're really looking forward to this evening's lecture, and I will now hand over to Michal.
Thank you so much, Celia. Thank you, Celia. Thank you to the team at CCLA for having us. It's just fabulous to have this view. And I mean, frankly, I don't get out much in the evenings at all. So I'm really appreciating it. But it's wonderful to be gathered with you all. So just to tell you a bit about the format before I introduce John. John's going to deliver the lecture, and then the two of us will sit down here. There'll be a few of my questions to put up with at the beginning. And then we have some microphones. I hope to hear from as many of you as possible, though our time is limited. So I'm here to very much as a supporter of John and his work over the years to build bridges really throughout his professional life. John Casson and I first met when he was at the British Embassy in Washington, which I think is 20 years ago now. But it was also, I was thinking that like now, it was also a time of tension and difficulty. The Iraq War was about to begin, and he subsequently has had diplomatic postings to Jordan and to Brussels. He worked for David Cameron in Downing Street, so he's pretty much seen it all before he came to L'Arche, and he's brought all of that knowledge and experience to leading L'Arche for the last 2.5 years. So the lecture has a wonderful title about joyful rebellion, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing it. And I don't know whether you're going to say something about L'Arche's work, John, but also it may be new to you as it is to me before John joined it, but I think it's a there's really an incredible ethos at its heart, which is about connecting people with learning disabilities and others and building communities. And they might be residential communities or there might be other kinds of communities, but I think we can all understand why that is so important. And so to deliver the 2023 Tablet Lecture, please welcome John Casson.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you to CCLA as well. Thank you to Tablet. Thanks to all of you for your friendship and creating this opportunity for conversation with all of us tonight. Thank you. I want to talk about a group of people on whom modern life takes a heavy toll. Not people with learning disabilities. That will come later. Not people manipulated by artificial intelligence. That's later too. First, if I can quote the musical Hamilton, let's talk about all those people who've got to be in the room where it happens. People like those I knew in 10 Downing Street, and among ambassadors and world leaders. People like me. Have you ever thought why shows like The Thick of It and Yes Minister make such great TV? It's not because people in power are special, but because places of power spin us around like a centrifuge, and they tease out what we are for examination. In Downing Street, you live between two incompatible forces. The illusion, on the one hand, that you should have an immediate answer for everything. And on the other hand, the reality that you actually control very little. And this makes for a frenzied way of living. When I worked in Number 10, I used to wake up every day with a burning in my chest. Eventually, I traced it to the preposterous notion I had that every morning I should wake up, hear whatever world problem Michal was talking about on the radio, and have a solution ready for the Prime Minister's morning meeting at 8:30. As ambassador later on in Egypt, I wanted to give an inside take and a prediction on everything that happened in a country of 100 million people. My mind felt like a combine harvester, devouring every conversation and experience and spitting them out in little packages. My wife says I was there, but never fully present. I didn't set out to become like this. I followed a script we're all given. Fulfill your potential. Make a difference. Find your vocation. Only slowly, I noticed that this ideal of a heroic self, authoring my life, had me inhabiting my days disconnected from others, from the world, and from myself. Now, I don't think I'm alone in this. All of us, in power or not, sense ways in which our modern living doesn't feel all that free. Our meritocracy weighs us by what we achieve, and so we're programmed to be driven, and we become workaholics or disappointed. Our consumerism tells us that we are what we purchase and experience, and so we're programmed for dissatisfaction, stuck on the hedonic treadmill. Our technology programs us for distraction, our phones insatiable for our attention. And our individualism programs us for disconnection, not knowing our neighbours, and all expressing our uniqueness with the same genes and memes as everyone else. The scattered presence that my wife sensed in me is perhaps our defining characteristic. Who isn't feeling busy and overwhelmed? The great project of modernity has been for humans to remake the world, to liberate ourselves from geography, from our bodies, from time, from other people. It's given us vaccines, video calls, new heart valves, vast economic surplus, welfare states. And I don't mean to be glib, these are all true marvels. But the Great Freedom Project has not made us as individuals truly free, or more fully humanly alive. And we see the same conundrum at a global level. Setting out to multiply the potential of our human labour, humankind created slavery. Setting out to master the planet's resources, we triggered unmasterable climate change. Setting out to maximise human knowledge and behaviour, we became manipulated by the online world and overwhelmed, defrauded, divided, not really knowing what's real. So how did we get into this pickle? This iatrogenic trap where our cures make us sick, where grasping at freedom makes us unfree, and grasping at control leaves us overwhelmed. I want to trace it back to our thinned out set of modern ideas about humanness. Because we've put our faith in an assumption that the purpose and preciousness of human beings lies in three things particularly: our cognition, as rational minds with symbolic thinking and language; our utility, as efficient, productive makers and doers; and our autonomy, as self-sufficient, self-determining individuals. And of course, when we pin our human specialness and purpose to these things, we set up a ladder of human worth, of greater and lesser human worth. And that's what enabled our exploitation of other people, of other species, and of the planet. And so when Richard Dawkins said that it was immoral to bring a child with Down syndrome into the world, he was expressing this governing assumption consistently. Parliament has, after all, written the same hierarchy of inferior human status into abortion law. People who are apparently less independent, less useful, or less cognitively able are deemed less human. The governing metaphor that encodes these ideas is the machine. We imagine ourselves like machines, useful, purposeful, and meant to master the world. And the trouble is, to echo Hannah Arendt, not that these ideas are wrong, but that they become true. We're in a feedback loop where we build our concepts of reality into our world and our technologies, and then we in turn are reshaped by what we build and the tools we use. And that's not just the way that our buildings and cars are reshaping our bodies. It's not just how a society of busyness and isolation is reshaping our relationships to other people and to nature. It's our very brains rewired by our technologically saturated environment. We're less able to memorize, to concentrate, to be present or still. What we imagine becomes reality. And what we grasp hold of reshapes us. And all of this before we've even come to artificial intelligence. And AI now brings new urgency to this question of our human freedom. Like all technological step changes, AI promises much. New medicines, for example, and tools to assist disabled people. In return, it will change us in ways that we can't foresee. Now, if you haven't been following along at home, let me say that anxiety about AI tends to fall into three types. There's functional anxiety about the harm that AI might do to how we currently live, like AI taking our jobs, intensifying inequality, making it impossible to tell what's real and what's false. There's existential anxiety that AI's snowballing potency could wipe out our way of life or even our species, either because it's in the wrong human hands or because AI itself will dispose of humans as the nearest competitor species. And then third, and perhaps most telling for tonight's discussion, is what I would call ontological anxiety. In other words, let's call it the human identity crisis. It's dawning on us that our thin notion of human being as cognitive, productive, and autonomous is being colonized by AI that we designed to be hyper-cognitive, hyper-productive, and increasingly autonomous. And so people are asking, could that mean that we're on a path to converge with AI? If not, what is left for us in terms of unique human identity and value? And I would suggest that perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that having spent modernity remaking ourselves in the image of machines, we find it increasingly hard to distinguish ourselves from machines and AI from us. But what I want to explore tonight is not whether and when AI will become human. It's how we can resist such thin governing ideas of our human being in the first place. Of course, we should treasure our human intelligence, language, will. But as Ian McGilchrist writes in his book, The Master and His Emissary, if we let one mode of being in the world, grasping, comprehending, fixing, dominating, if we let that mode usurp everything else that makes us human, we end up less than fully human. The reality we inhabit becomes a chamber echoing this stunted way of being back to us. And our freedom turns out to be an illusion. It starts to look more like addiction, manipulation, or slavery. And yet, we still have footholds in a richer way of being alive and being human. If I could quote a great Jesuit poet, there lives the dearest freshness deep down things. A crack of light for me as ambassador was when I started to pay attention to what might help me show up in my job with deeper wisdom and character. The stillness of prayer gave me a first foothold. I began to pick up a scent of aliveness and freedom, and to recognize what in me was less free and less alive. Eventually, I followed this trail out of government and found my way to L'Arche. L'Arche is, as Michal said, a worldwide movement made up of local communities where people with and without learning disabilities share their lives, share their homes, their friendships, their spiritual journeys, their joys, and their heartaches. In this country, our communities in 11 towns and cities provide government-funded care and support to adults who live with intellectual and often other complex disabilities. But we try, as well as being service providers who do things for people, to live a calling to be with each other in real mutuality and equality too. And it turned out this life together in L'Arche offered me another foothold of resistance. I want to be wary tonight of speaking in glib generalizations, and I want to be wary of speaking for people, including some people here tonight, who tell their own stories much better than me. People with learning disabilities have as many varied life experiences and capacities and characteristics as everyone else. Easy platitudes diminish who they are. But systemically, People with learning disability share an experience of being made marginal by the governing model of human being. People with learning disabilities tend to lose out in a society like ours, a society that overvalues achievement, what we do, accumulation, what we have, and approval, what others think of us. And so the experience of people with learning disability highlights the unkindness and inhumanity of modern life. People with learning disabilities are more likely to be ignored, to be lonely, to be afraid of hate crime when they think of going out, and to die younger because the NHS doesn't give them the standards of care they deserve. The care system that shapes the lives of most adults with learning disabilities isn't just chronically understaffed and underfunded. It's a managerialist bureaucracy that turns people into clients or users, turns community into buildings and services instead of relationships, and turns care into a commodity that's handed out in packages. And even our vital and courageous disability rights movement can marginalise people with learning disabilities when it downplays the actualities of their lives and impairments and reinforces the social norms and aspirations that marginalise them. But all that is another talk, because what I want to focus on tonight is not the system, but something else you discover when you pay sustained, curious, loving attention to the people of L'Arche and to others with learning disabilities. So let me tell you about Michael, a 60-year-old black Londoner who I'm getting to know by walking with him to church some weekends. Michael is unimpressed by my diplomatic small talk. His first answer to most questions is, "I'm not too sure." But if I stop talking and let him show me the right walking pace for his streets, Michael starts to show me things that matter. Formula One and the football, Tom Jones, pizza, and his friends Steve and Solly. The things that connect us to the world. For Michael, the weekly rhythm of Channel 4 newsreaders. He hasn't mentioned the BBC rota yet. The rota of assistants in his house. The things that make our bodies come to life. Music, walking. The things that are essential at church, bread and wine, custard creams, the Lord's Prayer, and things that are, frankly, dispensable, verses 5 and 6 of any hymn, and lengthy parish notices. When you pay attention, you find people with learning disabilities, despite the myriad ways the world diminishes their worth, stubbornly and fully inhabiting their humanity. Which, by the way, is exactly what Megan O'Geeblen advocates as the response that we should all make to being overtaken by AI, to stubbornly and fully inhabit our humanity. People with learning disabilities are used to navigating the experience that we all now face of being found inadequate in a contest of cognitive intelligence. They do so with grit and sometimes cussedness and the determination to be themselves, to take up their space, to thrive. And they offer us a foothold and another place to stand. This is a joyful rebellion. It subverts our thinned out ideas of human value. By being himself, Michael shows my habitual, talkative, restless hurry for what it is. He invites me to rediscover the givenness of the world. being together in L'Arche invites us, all of us, to drop our analytical, problem-solving glare for a sustained, loving gaze. It's the gaze that people with learning disabilities can rarely be sure of in our society, but do often experience in abundance within their families. My friend Jen says this about being with her son Tate, who has autism and Down syndrome and who doesn't communicate verbally. Jen says, being with him, there's a quietness at a different level. He doesn't know my place in life's game. He's free of anxiety. Can I say he's not acing being human? This is his game, and he's extremely good at being who he is. L'Arche is by no means perfect. Social care can be relentless. But still, in L'Arche, we find springing up exactly this sort of miracle. People being profoundly present and attentive and tender together. Up in Manchester, Nem, our community leader, says of our disabled members there, I can tell you about how Millie has eyelashes that could launch 1,000 ships. Or what it does to my heart when Crispin giggles and twitches with delight. I can tell you about helping Joe shave, listening to Herb Albert, and it would take twice as long because we would dance as he shaved. I can tell you the process of falling in love with people time and again. That idea of falling in love is telling. It's a profoundly human experience, but it's not about productivity or reason or autonomy. It shifts our paradigms and points us back to more fully human ways of being alive. Falling in love is when being beats doing. It's when being known is better than knowing all the information in the world. It's when interdependence trumps self-sufficiency. It's quality over quantity. The givenness of a specific person in a particular time and place. Some of you will have noticed the theological implications of all this. That our human preciousness is grounded not in any intrinsic qualities of our own, not in our reason, not even in our brokenness. It's in the givenness of who we are and in the ultimate destiny we are called to. Friendship with others, with creation, and with God. When we resist this creatureliness and grasp at making the world in our image, we end up less human and less free. And I would suggest the gift of our members with learning disabilities is not all about the vulnerability and brokenness which Jean Vanier used to dwell on. It's that by being themselves, they preserve things that we risk losing. Practices and textures of real human aliveness and being. Like the prophets, they invite us to experience the world as it really is, which means inescapably painful and incomplete and unmasterable, and yet ultimately grounded in generosity and loving kindness. Like Jesus, they invite us to see what life to the full could be. But enough theology, because in the end, the joyful rebellion in L'Arche is not so much about theology as spirituality, not so much principles as practices, not so much explained as experienced. So what did L'Arche people show us earlier this year when, in our big conversation on spirituality, we asked them, what gives you life? It was in togetherness, in particular times and places, in encumbered bodies, in nature, in slowness and interruptions, in playfulness and dancing and cake and getting your nails done, in times when things fall apart, in worship and prayer and availability and love. These are practices of reality in resistance to modernity's illusions. Practices of freedom and recovery from our addictions and idolatry. Practices of meekness instead of mastery. Practices of receiving instead of grasping. Different ways of knowing. Deep wisdom, not artificial intelligence. This is the invitation to joyful rebellion. I've heard it in L'Arche. You may find it elsewhere. It's often to be found at the margins. But wherever that is for you, may we all find somewhere, some particular place with particular people to receive and nurture our full human being. Thank you.
John, thank you. You've given us all a lot to think about, and I think I won't have been alone in the room in thinking about my own life reflected in the light of what you said, not necessarily in a good way, but perhaps you can perhaps we can expand on what you were saying, and how it applies might apply to other, the principles of what you're saying might apply to other people's lives in another context. I'm curious, first of all, to know how long you've been thinking along those lines. So there's the time when your mind feels like a combine harvester when you're working in Downing Street. But was there a long period of time where you were thinking, there's a deeper way of being and I'm not in the right place? And how much that was connected with your work, which, you know, carries an immense responsibility, whether it's for our image abroad or for policy at home?
I think in many ways it did start with the last two jobs I did in government, as private secretary to Prime Minister and then as ambassador in Egypt. Because I got to those jobs and finally in my life I thought, this isn't something I'm doing while I get to the real thing. This is probably the real thing I'm going to do. And it matters how I do it. And I really want to do it with wisdom and character. And that turned out to be a lot easier said than done. Actually, I was very competitive. I wanted to have the best idea first, and I wanted to beat the Egyptian Foreign Minister when he was in a tussle with me, and I wanted to be seen to be a success, and then I wanted to be popular, and I wanted to get past 1 million Twitter followers, which I did, by the way.
And kept them.
But it made me, I'd always been a person of faith, and therefore I could turn to practices of prayer, and I started to it was almost like the first time I went scuba diving. Wow, there's all this amazing stuff under here. Why didn't anybody tell me? And I started, as I said in my talk just now, I started to learn to sense the difference between the flavour of when I was operating with freedom and life and when I was being driven along by other things. And that set me on the trail of thinking. That's a basis for making choices about how I want to be in the world. And by the way, in case I've given the wrong impression, I had not nailed it.
But I wonder whether you could have found that richer way of life while continuing to be in that same world, or whether they were incompatible.
I want other people to stay in that world and to find the practices of freedom and humanity, because it's incredibly important what the decision makers in those places are doing now. I think it's incredibly hard. It's a toxic environment for that kind of humanity. I'll talk a bit more about what it must be like now for people making these decisions about Israel and Gaza. But I believe it can happen anywhere. I believe you can find full humanity anywhere if you're paying attention. And in a way, the same activity, being CEO of L'Arche, being an ambassador, can either be done in a way that's expanding humanity and life or not. And that's a lot about what's going on inside you, I suppose. So, but each individual's got to follow the thread of life for them. And although lots of people told me I was making a mistake, I decided to follow it out of government because that's where the little scent of life seemed to be taking me, like the salmon in the ocean looking for their home stream. I just started to sniff this particular scent to follow.
Yeah, because of course, well, when I thought about what you were saying and tried to put it in the context of my own working life, I thought, I had to ask myself, it's like the contrast between being functional, and we can generally all be functional and efficient and do the next day's work and, in my case, write the next cue, do the next interview, whatever it is in everyone else's way of life, or whether we are really connecting and going beyond what we can get away with and what society expects of us. Did I understand you correctly?
And I think these things will always be mixed up together. I'm not saying we can ever abandon the other reality that we inhabit. One of the ideas I was using was this book, The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist, which talks about the world is created and experienced through the left hemisphere of the brain versus the right hemisphere of the brain. And he starts saying you can only be human by the integration of the two. But we become so over-indexed towards one that we risk creating a world that reinforces that and lose the other. So it's about holding the two together.
So you, I think, have found, because of the meaning that you derive and the clear, obvious importance and deep purpose of your work at L'Arche, I think you have found that track. As you said, you're not there all the time, but as in you haven't completely cracked it. But I think you're on that path which you feel comfortable about. How much of the work at L'Arche and the exposure gave you that? Do you think it could have come from somewhere else, or does the world, once you have that access point into the world of people with learning disabilities, how much a contributor is it?
So between leaving government and coming to L'Arche, there was about 2 years of not working in a particular job and trying to pursue this thing partly about fasting from the things I felt a bit over-addicted to. And I got to the point where I thought I need a shaping commitment. I need a place to ground this, otherwise I'm just a sort of self-licking lollipop. I'm just free-floating. And so for me, that was the gift of L'Arche. It kind of gave me a foothold to stand, as I was saying. I mean, if you're looking for a place yourself, we'd love you to come to L'Arche. But I think everybody needs what are the things that ground us in human maturity and receiving the world, not just reactivity to the world, and wisdom and freedom? I think they tend to be experiences of great suffering or great love, or rooting yourself in particularity of practices and people. And for me, love, I haven't experienced Titanic suffering or Titanic love. It's more, this is a place to root practices of commitment to individual, specific people and places. And because of what I was talking about, of the way that people with learning disabilities are in the world and are required to be in the world, it proves a particularly rich place for me to explore this other dimension.
Yeah. We're going to get the microphones around the room and just, is there just one, or have we got more than one? Okay, perfect, thank you so much. So do raise your hand if you've got a question, and we'll probably get two people to ask questions at the same time. But just before we do that, I am struck by what you're saying, that, we are seeing, I mean, people who work in news are seeing how the world it feels like, with every passing day, there are more difficulties that we see, and a lot of people sort of turn away from news because they want to protect themselves from some of those images, or, it's out there, that really tough stuff, but we kind of can protect ourselves a bit. And is that, I'm sure you can relate to that, but at the same time, if we're going to be in a richer state, do we have to embrace what is really hard around us?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I think there's a healthy impulse not to just have your brain surfing along on whatever the latest surge of social media is. And just for my own self-protection, there've been some days in the last 2 weeks where we've been avoiding the news. And I've been turning down invitations to talk about it on the TV and the radio.
That's okay. I thought you were turning down the radio. That's like obviously a terrible crime.
I wanted to feel like I kind of gazed on it enough and had something to say and not just be kind of latest hot take.
Which is in itself a really good and important thing. And, you know, thank God people do think like that.
But what I did was I started rereading a book that means a lot to me by a woman called Etty Hillesum, which some of you will know. She was a Jewish woman in the Netherlands. She was murdered in Auschwitz. And she wrote a diary in the last 3 years of her life, which contains one of the great luminous souls of the 20th century. And knowing that she was probably going to her death in a concentration camp, she wrote this stuff that just seems to me to be about the kind of posture we've got to have in response to this stuff that's going on, like in Gaza and Israel. So she said, I try to look things straight in the face, even the worst crimes, and to discover the small, naked human being amid the monstrous wreckage caused by man's senseless deeds. And then she said another time, ultimately we just have one moral duty, to reclaim large areas of peace in ourselves, more and more peace, and to reflect it towards others. The more peace there is in us, the more peace there will be in our troubled world. And I suppose I'm so aware, you know, I was in Washington on 9/11, I was in Downing Street when when the war was going on in Syria and we sent the RAF into action in Libya. I'm aware of how little freedom and space that people making decisions now have. They're being carried along by the psychological urgency of the situation, the military timetables. When you only have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And we desperately need statesmen, people of statecraft, who have some place to ground a human freedom. And the front line is within us all to do that work.
Okay, Maggie, I think you've got a question. Who else? Yes. So, why don't we? Can we give the gentleman here a microphone and Maggie, and we'll start with you two, and then we'll carry on.
Great,
so, do you want to go first?
Yeah.
So.
Thanks, John. Really good to hear you. The question's really about, you spelled out about the kind of juggernaut, the runaway juggernaut of sort of technocracy, which takes over and thins out our humanity. I'm just wondering, you're a resistor, you named other resistors. Are there, from your experience in government or elsewhere in the culture, is there a kind of resistance movement that would give hope, sort of more broadly within our culture? Do you get what I'm saying? Sort of, where are the resistors that you see? A person with a learning disabilities, yes, and who else?
Okay, Maggie.
I just wanted to say we're very, very lucky this evening to have some pupils from Cardinal Vaughan School in Holland Park. 9 of them, I think, and I was chatting to them before, and they are all they're in the 6th form, they're beating up to A-levels, university, fighting for the best places at the best universities. What's your advice for them?
Well, where are you, the 9 of you? Give us a wave. Where are they? Ah, okay. Welcome. Somewhere between the 9-month-old and the rest of us. Skewed towards the 9-month-old, I think, overall. Okay, John?
I'd love to hear what they have to say about where the resistors are, to be honest, because this is the world that we're handing to them. I didn't make up all that stuff by myself that I was saying. There are lots of people reflecting on this. But I think we're at the beginning of understanding where to plant the resistance. And it exists in particularity, I think. So much of the thrust of our society is to quantity and immediacy and vastness that we can't comprehend. And I think our humanity lies in accepting specificity, and limit, and place. So I guess I'd love to hear what other people say.
I think also this age group, you will absolutely be living the things that John was saying at the beginning about all of us are told to fulfill our potential and to get out there and to give something back to the world. And can you offer some advice of, how to do that in in a deeper way, because it is possible to do
Well,
both.
I guess if I could talk to my own 19-year-old self, I would say I would talk about accumulating daily practice of attentiveness and contemplativeness and inner freedom. So you're not just trying to understand and master everything, but for me it would be practices of prayer. That when I kind of came to them afresh in my 40s, it was almost like a second religious conversion. As I said, like first time I went scuba diving. And I wish that those 20 years in between, I mean, I'm still someone that prayed, but I wish that I had accumulated the practices of attending to my inner freedom in the world and really seeing around me more deeply. And if I'd done, the little practices I do every morning now, through my 20s and 30s, I wish I had.
Yeah. So find that way. I think also it'll help you make better decisions. It's amazing how few people have a chance to stop and think. Actually, the stopping to think is very hard in our busy lives. Someone else had their hand up here in this area. Did I get that? Oh, sorry, you did. Yes. Could we give this lady? And is there someone else on that side of the room? Who else would? Yes. Can we get the other microphone behind? Yes, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to take you back to robots. We've some years ago probably started talking about robots are going to be there, they can care for people and so on, which comes quite into your area. But I thought at the time, I think it's Pascal who said, if you want to be religious, mix with religious people. So you can see where I'm going with robots. I think I'll just bring that. A few weeks ago, there was a man convicted of murder, and he'd been told to do it by his AI girlfriend. So perhaps you'd just like to, I'm very pessimistic about where humanity is going if we're being hollowed out more and more. More and more things are coming into the body, being implanted and so on. But if we're not mixing with other human beings, but with robots, where are we going to end up?
Yes, and sir?
Yes, thank you so much. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about your discovery about love and falling in love. It seems to me that it is something we can posit over against AI, possibly, I hope so. But also, in the culture as it is, as you describe it, which I think is pretty accurate, the idea of love seems to be either not well understood or not examined or talked about in a very superficial way, and certainly not examined as it has been in the past, through the past centuries in literature particularly. And so, but there seems to have been a spiritual discovery on your part through your encounters with people with learning disabilities. And I wonder if you can say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm very aware that I'm speaking for L'Arche as one of the newest people in L'Arche, and there's lots of people towards the back who can attest to this probably more profoundly than I can. And Richard, I saw you indicating, so I might just ask you that question, Richard.
Could we just send a
at the very back there.
microphone?
So Richard Keegabrol is a member of L'Arche London. He's an author of a very important book because it's a very rare... Richard's book's a very rare account of living in the world in the voice and perspective of a man with learning disability.
Yeah. Okay.
So Richard,
Sorry, John, we've got struggling to hear you very well. So say
Oh, is yours on, John? Very sorry. I should have realised.
oh, sorry, is that better? Can you hear me now?
Oh, very sorry.
Right, sorry. I was just asked Richard about what it was about the experience of being with people in L'Arche, which Nem said was like falling in love. That was liberating for me and helped me be more human. Do you want to say anything about what it's like in L'Arche for you, or did you have another question, Richard?
Well, I did have a question for you, but about being part of L'Arche is that people with learning disabilities are accepted as like one, and that I know Michael, I won't say his real name, who you're talking about, and I see that when you, because I go to the same church as him, I see that you're really compassionate and you really focused on Michael, you are, but also that I see that if there's a new assistant who comes sometimes to the church, that you make an effort of being friends to them as well. You know, if you notice people, you do, yes. But what the question I wanted to ask you, I bet your wife thought that you had a midlife crisis when you decided to leave working in 10 Downing Street to come to work at Larson's Sport. We thought, oh my God, what's going to happen here? Because you were like in the fast lane and working in with blue lights. I mean, for good reasons. We're going into with prime ministers and all that to going to work at last on your bicycle to get to the office, because as we know, there's not so much money in social care and all that. And in fact, but you did come at the time when we were, well, we all know what our founder fought for us and all, and what he didn't. I think that you came at the right time, and but I just want to say thank you for coming to last to be our leader, and that when you could have probably gone off to do bigger things in Parliament and all that, and that you turned round and that you came to last, you did, yes.
Well, thank you, Richard. You've been a great friend to me since I came.
I
I want to ask you a bit more about... Can I ask you another question, Richard? Because in the talk, I mentioned how Jean Vanier, those of you who don't know, L'Arche was set up by a man called Jean Vanier in France, who for many years was considered a living saint. After he died in 2019, it came out that he'd initiated a whole series of sexual relationships with women in the context of spiritual direction, using his reputation as a living saint in an abusive way. And it's been a big reckoning and trauma for L'Arche to come to terms with that. But it's also, in some ways, been an opportunity for us to decolonize L'Arche. So it's no longer about a hub of a French model that we all look to, but now we can reimagine what does L'Arche look like when we let the whole network of people with learning disabilities lead us in how to be together, how to and how to be with God. And Richard, one of the things I said about Jean was that he used to talk a lot about the brokenness of people with learning disabilities as their gift to the rest of us. And I said, maybe it's more than brokenness. I just wondered how you react to that discussion about what do the rest of us need from the people with learning disabilities and the experience that you have in the world.
Well, I think people with learning disabilities that, you either got a mild learning difficulty like I have, or you can be profound and multi-learning, or you can have autism as well and all that. But it's that at the end of it, we might not be able to make rockets and go to space or anything, but it's what we can give, like, like the shows we put on, like, that you might go to one of the workshops and you might end up dancing or something, in fact, it's just sitting down, having a cup of tea with someone, and that, you drove us to Greenbelt in the minibus you did, in fact, and I can't remember what we talked about, but I know that you helped me and somebody else is here tonight, but to find our tent and all that, you've gone from a...
Richard, thank you for not mentioning that I dinged the minibus on a podcast. But I think, in a way, Richard is giving the answer to these two questions, because I think what Richard's describing about falling in love is that it's not the big phrases and concepts, it's the very particular. It's the being with somebody in the daily, in the mundane, but allowing it to give you its meaning, the givenness, as I was saying. And in a way, that's my answer. I have no idea. Spending the summer reading about AI made me quite scared as well. But I have no idea whether we're going to be wiped out. I mean, we're not going to last forever. But
may I explore these two questions in
yeah,
a slightly different way, John? One is that, going to this lady's question about AI, I mean, in Japan, for example, robots are being used to a large extent in elderly care. Certainly, I don't know about social care or other forms of care. But is that something that instinctively, do you think it has any place in the world that you now know well, a place, or is it something that you instinctively would push back on?
I think I'm sure there are positive technologies, but I would be cautious. But I think, Raina, have you got an answer to that question?
No.
there's some specialists here who work a lot on care of adults with disabilities. Would you shy away from the idea of AI providing care?
I haven't spent my summer reading about it, so I don't think I know enough about it. All I can say is, there's things that there are, there's tasks you have to do in life, and then there's relationships, right? And you can't do one without the other, I think, to do them well. So I don't know, really.
And may I then come back to because I'm wondering how much, did you rediscover your faith later in life? Because you said that you found that space for prayer, and I don't know if you'd call it a midlife crisis, but did you have that kind of reckoning? I may have to give Kat a right of reply to anything you say, but was there a sort of reckoning of multiple kinds?
I mean, I normally call it a midlife transition, so I always had faith, but I think I'd had two legs of the stool. I'd had action and ideas as really defining things for me, and in midlife I discovered a third leg to the stool in terms of the contemplative way of being, or you might call it. Was that the question? Yes,
you could say a bit more.
Well, one thing I just wanted to mention, because we are, as I said, trying to rediscover what we mean by spirituality in L'Arche, which is really what I've been talking about, actually. And we're trying to make spirituality something that somebody can meet from a very deeply religious place and find real religious depth in it, but also can meet us coming the other way without any religious take at all. And we try to let the L'Arche way of being lead us in that. So for us, we're trying to take hold of the space where it is experienced before it's explained, where it's profoundly accessible. So someone with a PhD in theology and somebody who doesn't communicate verbally can meet on equal terms around it. As I said, where someone religious and someone non-religious can learn about each other's depths. And we're at the moment in the process of sharing around L'Arche these spirituality gift boxes, which contain little practices. And the first one, which I've got two of here, is called A Nice Cup of Tea. I don't want to reveal too much of the gift that's in it, but it just invites people to play. And another aspect of L'Arche spirituality is it's playful. These are the things that start to happen in the way we meet God when people with learning disabilities lead us. Richard mentioned sitting down and having a nice cup of tea, so it just made me think of this, because I brought two along, one to give to Maggie and Brendan from the tablet, and one to give to Michal, because I'd like to just let you play a bit with the L'Arche way of being human.
Thank you. That's very kind. And may I then, because I think we are out of time, unless your question is fairly swift. We could probably...
I was just going to follow up on...
Go on, wait, Oh, we've got another question.
We
might have to have two then. Okay.
You mentioned what you would say to individual pupils, but if you could have 2 hours with the Prime Minister, I don't mean this facetiously, and inspire him how we could change the educational system to embed your vision, because everything you've said tonight, I'm an ex-headmaster, everything in our educational system is against what you're saying. Even the dignity of vocational work, if you're not clever, is not addressed. The changes that have been suggested are really functional unit changes to create better mathematicians. If you had an hour with Richard, what practical steps would you ask him to make our children embedded in your vision? And they are the future. we're sort of almost past our sell-by date, but they are the future. How would you advise him?
Have we got a question from the future at the back?
Yes, we do. John, as a 17-year-old man, or should I say boy, I don't really know how to distinguish which. I've been going to a Catholic school for 7 years, and religion has always been something that's been relevant to me. You were speaking about spirituality and how it's the key to freedom. I was wondering if there were any other keys to freedom, bar spirituality, and if there was, if you had experienced any other ones.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I'm taking notes, by the way. Whatever your other keys to freedom are, I want to know, and I'm going to make sure I don't lose them.
If I had an hour with Rishi Sunak, I think I would say, go and have a lie down and have a good sleep. Because I just know how brutal the world that he's in is. But I think if I got a chance to try to get him to think about education, I suppose it would be that in the end people are formed and people change not by skill power and willpower and information, but by planting themselves in practices and relationships. So tend to that work of formation, not just education, which is an inner work of human maturity, and it requires making a shaping commitment. Go to the same place every Wednesday night and see the same person, even if it's boring. You've got to plant yourself somewhere and then reflect on it.
It's a good thought, isn't it? Is it something that we could embed in the education curriculum, or does it come from families and individuals? Because choices are made all the time about what we put in a national curriculum, and it could be that whether you nose it towards community service or whether you devise some kind of course that puts that children do once a week, I don't know, but there are policy choices that could arise from this if it was considered important.
I suspect if you turned it into a government initiative, you'd kill it. I mean, because to answer the other question, I think it depends what you mean by spirituality, because in a sense, it's meaningless to say everything is spirituality, because then nothing is spirituality. But spirituality can be found everywhere, because it's the way that you handle the texture of every single thing in life. It's the posture with which you approach everything. And that can be religious, or it can also be done from other starting points. And so I mentioned other things that I think bring people to that point in their human journey where they think, I'm not in charge, and the world is not a system of levers where I pull it and get the results I want. Part of that's about getting older, but it also comes from, as I said, experiences of suffering, of loss, of love, the practices of relationship and attention and planting yourself in community and belonging. I would say all of that is spirituality and theologically loaded, but it doesn't have to appear to be spirituality to the people living it.
Keys to freedom. It's a good place to end, I think. I want to thank John, obviously, for everything he shared, some of it deeply personal, but I think all of it has made us think. We'll all be responding in individual ways, but I think collectively it's, you will have struck an immense chord. Also, thank you to CCLA, and drinks are going to be served outside, so hopefully people can stay for a bit. And John Casson, thank you so much.